It's a lot of hocus pocus and smoke and mirrors. That's what this stuff is. Every single company or every single organization that you will work at, they have an entirely different method of valuating their employees. Different organizations will value different things about employees. Some places they care more about education. Some places they don't. Some places they care more about experience and seniority. Other places they care more about skills and, what you've actually done. It really varies. And then of these different things, they place different weights of value on them, right? So there's all kinds of ways of looking at how you place a value on an employee, right? And as a result, there is no real consensus. There's just multiple different methods. It's all very well to talk about negotiating your pay, right? But as most people know, you can't always negotiate, right? If you want to get a job at McDonald's or something, and they pay a certain amount per hour, that's the pay rate. You can try and haggle with them and stuff, but it's pretty much not going to work because they've decided that it's non-negotiable. This is what we pay. The end, right? And there's a lot of things reinforcing that. For example, if you have a lot of employees in the same position, I think that's called role multiplicity. You can get a job where you're the only person in that job. The job is unique to you. So if you are part of a work group or something, you're the only one that has that exact role, right? Or you can do the opposite. You can work in a place like a call center where you have hundreds of people that are all in the same role. They all have the same duties, and presumably they all get paid the same, right? They're all in the same position, and you have a standard, perhaps a range for that position, or there is no range, it's just one rate for that position, right? The problem, of course, is that let's say you're joining a call center or something, you're a customer service representative, and they've posted their pay rate for that role, and you try and negotiate for it, they're going to say, no, absolutely not. I mean, this is what we pay. Now, if that's not to your liking, I'm sorry, but we can't employ you. Even if they've extended an offer already, they'll rescind it if you indicate that, you're not satisfied with the pay. That's kind of a deal breaker. Because the implication is that if you were to negotiate more pay for being in that role, then if the word gets out among all the other employees, they would demand the same pay increase out of fairness, right? That's called a psychological contract. There is no agreement that says the company has to do that. The only agreement is that those employees have signed contracts that say you will be paid this rate, and in return, you will come to work and do this job. And they agreed to that. So there is no agreement, but it feels like there's an agreement if there's another employee doing the same job as you and they're getting paid more, right? It feels like, well, that's unfair. Even though we agreed on a rate for me, I still feel you should pay me more, So role multiplicity is one thing you can look at that will let you know if there may be room to negotiate your compensation or not. If you're one of 700 people, you probably won't be able to negotiate your pay. If you're one out of one person and the role is unique to you, then you could maybe negotiate because what they pay you, at the very least, is not going to be tied to what they pay anyone else because you're in your own unique role, right? So that's one thing you can look at. Another thing you can look at is, and this is not always possible from the outside, but sometimes it is, so I'm going to mention anyway. Another thing that can determine whether there's room to negotiate or not would be looking at the amount of money that flows through the company versus the amount of employees they have. Okay? Now, those two things are usually posted publicly. You can find them if you know where to look. It's not straightforward, but you can see that, okay? Now, the idea is that in some companies, usually business-to-business companies, B2B, right? You've got a lot of money flowing through a company with only a few people in it. And then in some B2C companies, business-to-consumer companies like McDonald's, you have the opposite. You have only a little bit of money flowing through the company, but you have a lot of employees needed to generate that much. Okay, so if there's a lot of employees for only a little amount of money, they probably won't be able to negotiate compensation. Okay, because they're very sensitive to how much money they pay out, right? In a company where there's a lot of money flowing through it and only, say, 12 employees. I worked at a company where we had 12 employees that brought in something like $15 million a year, for our branch office. Now, that's like, if you divide, that's like over $1 million per employee, if you want to look at it like that, revenue per employee, right? So what that means is that if one employee who's very valuable goes to the boss and says, I want to renegotiate my salary, or I walk, you need to pay me more, or I'm out of here, right? In that case, usually what happens is the boss will say, okay, fine, whatever, you want this? Okay, you got it. Don't leave. Very, very easy, right? Because they have the money to spare, and there's only a handful of employees, so it doesn't really make that much of a dent, right? If you had 700 call center workers and money's very tight, and you want a pay increase, and that implies that perhaps all the other 699 want more money, then that's bad, because if they all got that pay increase, they wouldn't be profitable anymore or something, potentially, right? Okay, so those are a couple of things you can look at. At least it kind of gives you an idea of whether pay may be negotiable. They may be able to go higher on things or not, right? Short version is you look at how many people in that role, and you can ask them this during a job interview. Are there any other people in this role? And if they say, yeah, there are 700, okay, that tells you something. Another thing is looking at if it's business to business or business to consumer. There's wild exceptions to this, but the very general rule is that B2B, they can negotiate more. B2C, they can negotiate less, very generally speaking. Okay, so that can kind of tell you a bit how the company's positioned. So that's an important point, like knowing if you can negotiate or not. Okay, what's usually good is to make the attempt, but do it in such a way that you're indicating it's not a deal breaker. If they say no, you can just say okay, and then just not a problem, and then you sign your offer, and then there's no issues, right? That would be the ideal case. So that's what I recommend. Okay, another thing that I wanted to cover today, that to do with salary negotiation, that I don't usually talk about, are substitutes for compensation, substitutes for a salary increase, right? Now, it's a relatively common thing that an employer, they may really not be able to budge on your salary or your pay rate, okay? So they can't increase your salary being how much money you make in a year, right? Or your pay rate, which is usually the pay you make in an hour, right? An hourly wage. They may not be able to go higher on that, but they can give you other things. For example, they can give you more vacation days. So if you want something, but they're saying they're playing hardball, we can't give you more pay. It's like, okay, well, can you give me this? Can you give me more sick days, more vacation days, right? That's an obvious one. Now, benefits and things, you can discuss that if you get to like a management position, that kind of thing. Usually for most people, they're not going to want to change the benefit package for people. It's not easier for them to do. The whole point is to suggest something that's easy for them to do that doesn't really hurt them very much. Usually benefits don't fall into that role, in my experience, because it's tough for them to make a custom benefit arrangement for one employee. Okay, but what they can do is they can do things like signing bonuses. If you're not familiar, a signing bonus is when you first sign on to a company. You become an employee, right? They say, welcome aboard, right? And what you could say is like, look, when I start, I understand you can't give me a salary increase, so every year I get more money, but can you give me a one-time, like a signing bonus, a one-time payment when I start? So like, here's $2,000 or something, the day I start. That's a signing bonus, right? Now, because it isn't a recurring payment, a lot of times they can say, yes, we can't give you a bump in your salary, but we can give you a signing bonus. And then you get something, but we don't have to bump up our salary. So we're both happy, right? So sometimes you can negotiate a signing bonus. So that's something worth asking about if you get to that point. We talked about sick days and vacation days. There's other things too. There's almost the opposite of a signing bonus is a retention bonus. So that says like, if I stay for X amount of time, okay, I'm still in this role or I'm still with the company, in say 2 years, 5 years, whatever, then I get another bonus. I get another lump sum payment. You give me $5,000 or something, in 2 years. So that's kind of like, that can be good because it shows that like, look, I'm committed to staying. I'm committed to making this work. And if I am staying and it is working, then you paying me a little extra money shouldn't hopefully be that much of a problem, right? I understand you not wanting to take a chance on me, but if it's clear that I'm working out and I'm a good employee, you shouldn't have an issue paying that out. So you can ask for a retention bonus, right? That's another thing. Sometimes people will do that. For professional jobs, you can get these, generally speaking. If you're relocating, you could ask for relocation assistance. You can't bump up my pay, you can't give me more benefits, but, you can give me relocation assistance. So if you're requiring relocation for this, then I get something to help me cover the costs of moving across the country or across the world or something like that. So these are all other things you can throw into the mix. If they're really playing hardball on your pay or your salary, these are other things you can ask for that sometimes it's a little bit easier for them to say yes to, and then you still get something. You get a substitute for what you were looking for. Okay. There's other kinds of stuff too. There's bonuses for all other kinds of things. And then there's perks, right? I don't know if people know what perks are. Perks stand for perquisites. They're things that you get. It's not a benefit because a benefit is something they give you, like pay, that's non-cash, right? A benefit is like something they give you in compensation that's non-cash. Okay, that's the definition of a benefit. A perk is something that you get, in theory, to help you do the job. So, for example, they'll give you a big fancy office, or they'll give you a company car, or they'll give you, if you're a tradesperson, they might give you your tools, or they might give you a discount on buying tools. It's your tools, but they'll give you like some kind of assistance. They'll match whatever money you put in to help you buy the best tools. But then you get to keep it. It's yours, right? So it's a perk. Like a lot of managers, what they do, it's a well-known thing. They'll go and they'll do a business meeting in the Bahamas or something, and then they'll say, well, it is a business expense, just like the company would pay us for renting a conference room across the city. The company will pay for us to all fly to the Bahamas and stay in fancy hotels for a week to have this one meeting, right? Now you could argue, is that excessive? Of course it is. But technically, it's still a business expense, just like a company car or a big office, right? But you get the benefit of it. You could take that business meeting and take your whole family with you and go on vacation or something. You know what I mean? It's like, it's valuable to you, even though it's technically something that's part of your job, right? That's a perquisite. So you can ask for those, right? And if you know what to ask for, these can be really real areas of opportunity because, it benefits you as well as the company, so they don't have as much resistance to giving you a perk as opposed to giving you compensation or benefits. You know what I'm saying? Like salary or benefits. So these are all extra dimensions to any kind of employment contract that may or may not apply. So you have these to work with also. So depending on what job you're going for, you can ask for any or all of these if they're really giving you some pushback on, raising your salary or your pay rate or any other aspect of your direct compensation. Okay. Next thing I want to cover that if you're into salary negotiation, if you're into like this whole topic, okay, something I don't usually talk about is just to this is a little bit of a reiteration, but I want to go into it more here. Negotiation is not persuasion, right? Everybody thinks that, they've never really done this, that negotiation is the ability to persuade someone, to influence something. That's not what it is at all. You see, you don't have control over the other party. You only have control over yourself, right? So the idea is that whatever position the other party takes, okay, what would be very advantageous for you is to know, okay, if they decide to adopt this attitude and only offer this, then here's what my response is going to be to it. So you go down to a negotiation or you have a dialogue with them, and regardless of what they propose or what they're willing to do or what their position is, you have it all worked out in advance. You say, okay, if they offer me less than this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to say no deal. If they offer me between this and this, then I'm going to do this. And if they offer me more than this, then I'm going to do this third thing. Okay? So, and you have a plan in place for each of those cases, right? Each outcome. So, for example, if you are offered anything less than this, you know that, okay, I'm not taking it. Absolutely not. I'm not going to negotiate. I'm not going to bargain. I'm just going to say, nope, no deal, because I have a job offer in my hand that will pay me more than that. So why would I take this job for less than that, right? If they're going to offer me between this and this, in that case, I don't have a better alternative right now, but I know that it's within reason that I could get a better alternative in a very short amount of time. You see, maybe you figured that they're paying you below your worth, but you don't have another offer in your hand for that amount right at this moment, okay? So you figure okay, if they're offering me less than that, it's still to my advantage to keep moving and looking for another position, because within a very short amount of time, it's likely that I'd be able to find something that beats that, right? Something like this, right? So the idea is that you come prepared, knowing your position for every possible sort of proposal or course of action the other party could suggest. It's about knowing yourself. And the key thing is about developing viable alternatives to this. So if this doesn't work out and you can't reach a deal, you have a plan B. You have another option, okay? So it's very simply a matter of knowing your position, knowing what you're going to do under every possible case. Okay, so that brings us to our next topic, how to increase your negotiating power. It's very simple. You need to find alternatives. So if you're going to try and negotiate a job offer and you don't have any other viable options, you only have two possible outcomes: unemployment, or you get this job, right? Now, in your case, let's pretend that unemployment is no longer really a practical option. You need cash, you need money, so you need something. So you don't really have an alternative to any kind of negotiated agreement with these people, right? So that really means you have no negotiating power whatsoever. There's no alternative for you. You have to get this job. So therefore, you have no real power to negotiate. The only thing you could do is go in there and bluff. And any bluff that you make, you have to be prepared for it to be called, right? That's the problem. So, the real way to come out on top is to have options, to create options for yourself, right? Now, what does this thinking involve? This thinking involves more than first meets the eye. When you go and look for a job, you may decide, okay, there are certain jobs that are just beneath me. I shouldn't have to do that. I'm not going to even apply for those because that's not what I'm going for, right? Okay. Well, now that we've talked about how negotiation hinges upon having alternatives if things don't work out, maybe it might be worth your while to apply to a couple of these jobs that are maybe beneath you at the moment, just to see. It probably is not going to be something that would work out, but it would be nice to have something in your back pocket, just so you have an alternative, right? The other great thing is, on a personal level, you might not have to care too much about these, and it might be kind of interesting just to go and put yourself forward for this. And you don't think you're ever going to take it, but you're just there to see what's involved, right? Sometimes you can be pleasantly surprised, and it's nice to have something in your back pocket. It helps you get a bit of confidence in things like this, right? Okay. So it's about having alternatives. Now, let's go further. Okay, when can you negotiate? You can't negotiate before you get to the offer stage. It doesn't work like that. If they're still looking at many other candidates and they haven't really been sold on you yet, they haven't decided that they want you, you can't negotiate at that point. You can't just say, I demand this much money. The only thing that's going to result in is them eliminating you. Okay, so don't do that. Recognize that any kind of conversation about compensation before you have a written offer in your hand means you're in that stage. They haven't settled upon you. They haven't decided upon you yet. So therefore, you should not try and negotiate. You should simply try and avoid that whole discussion. Because the moment you say, I need this, you're risking them eliminating you because there's always going to be somebody cheaper, right? The idea is you want them to realize that they want you. You're the one they want. And once they do that, then you have a little bit of power to push back a little and say, okay, that's great. You want me, but I'm going to need this. You know? And if you're asking for something reasonable, most of the time they'll say, fine. You know, assuming there's power to negotiate at all, there's some leeway there. They'll just say, sure, you know, whatever. There you go. It's reasonable. That's fair. Just sign the paper and let's start this, right? Okay. You can only negotiate at the offer stage. And if you understood their perspective, you would see why this is the case. Usually in the process, you have a recruiter, you know, most of the time. And then you certainly have a hiring manager who is the one that's really initiated this job. They're the one that says, we need an extra person in this role, right? Now, usually the hiring manager doesn't work in the HR department. Unless you're trying to get hired as a recruiter or something, the hiring manager won't be in the HR department. They'll be in, you know, the marketing department, the operations department, supply chain, administration, finance, accounting, like they'll be in some other area, right? So that means that sitting in rounds of job interviews and scrutinizing resumes and defining job descriptions, that's not their core job. This is a nuisance. It's a distraction. They've got their actual work to do, which is in marketing or operations or finance or, accounting or supply chain. That's what they have to do. They've got their own job. This is a distraction, right? They want this process finished as quickly and as painlessly as possible so they can just fill the position. They can get on with their real work, right? Now, if they offer you the job and you're kind of, you're on the edge of agreeing, but you're not quite agreeing, you're still like pushing for this and that, a lot of times the hiring manager will just say, you know what, just give this damn person what they want so then we can just get moving. I've wasted too much time on this whole hiring thing. I got my own work to do and we need that person. So can we just get on with it, please? Offer them more money or whatever it is, just get them on board, That's usually, to varying degrees, how the hiring manager feels. They are not happy about delays at the offer stage. They just want to get this thing over with. Okay? The same way you would feel about having to do some kind of task that's a distraction from your main thing that you normally do, right? That's how the hiring managers genuinely feel, okay? In the vast majority of situations, to a varying degree, okay? Now, the other thing is that there's also a recruiter involved. Now, if you're the person that they've extended an offer to, okay, usually what has happened is if there's a recruiter in the process, the recruiter has either recommended you or they've signed off on you, okay? So they're not the decider. The decider is the hiring manager, and the hiring manager usually is going to hire who they want, okay? But they do, most hiring managers know that you should at least listen to the recruiter's recommendation because the recruiter does provide a different perspective. They're coming at this from like an HR perspective. They know labor laws, they know in theory, they know personality types and motivations and all this kind of stuff. So it would be stupid not to listen to them. It doesn't mean you always have to take their advice, but you at least want to take it into consideration. Now, if the recruiter has recommended you or signed off on you, and then you end up not working out, They give you an offer, you refuse it, and it doesn't work out. That's embarrassing for the recruiter to varying degrees. Sometimes it's like negligible, other times it's a really big deal, especially if the recruiter recommended you against the sort of preference of the hiring manager. They make you the offer, and then you throw it right back in their face. It's very embarrassing for the recruiter. So they do not want you to walk under those situations, in that situation. Okay, so that's kind of a thing that's sometimes going on behind the scenes. So therefore, there'll be pressure to just agree to whatever it is you want so they can just get you on board, and they can get you on board soon. And the recruiter doesn't look like an idiot recommending a candidate that would throw the offer back. Okay, so sometimes this is a major element that's going on. Sometimes it's practically non-existent, but this is a thing that you get usually to varying degrees. Okay. So this works to your advantage, right? They do not want the process to be lengthened, and they just want you to agree. So, for example, if you're in the negotiation stage and they make a proposal and you say, okay, well, listen, I'm going to have to think about this. I'll let you know in, say, 48 hours or, maybe in 3 business days, something like that, right? Now, they don't like that. They want an immediate answer all the time. But it is reasonable to give you a little bit of time to consider it, right? So if every offer and counteroffer lengthens the process by days, they will rapidly grow impatient with this process. Sometimes that can be bad for you. They might decide this is too much trouble, and they'll just end it and rescind the offer. Or they'll just say, you know what, just fine, whatever. Just, here, yes, you got your thing, right? Just so they can move quickly, right? So that's why I recommend that when you negotiate, the thing you're going to be offering is you're going to be offering, here, let's just do this very quickly, right? If you agree to what I'm proposing, not only will I be on board, but we can move really quickly with this. I can start whenever you want, and then you worry later about any kind of hoops you got to jump through with giving notice and all this, okay? But that, if it helps them to agree to what you're wanting to get, then it's worth it, in my opinion. That's why I recommend that. Okay, so that's something you have in your court to be able to speed it up. Not only do you agree, you say, I agree, and I can start whenever you want, as soon as you say yes to this, So you're making it a very sweet deal for them. They can get this over with very quickly. Okay, so you have that to bargain with. A lot of people don't realize that. You might not be super time sensitive. They usually are, okay? Now, there's a couple of other things I wanted to go through that if you're into like salary negotiation, this is going to be important to you. People may not realize this, but companies honestly have no idea what you're worth. Absolutely none. You see, even if you employed like a sort of quorum of PhDs to advise on this, they wouldn't be able to agree on the value of an employee. You know what I mean? It's like getting economists in a room. There's all kinds of competing theories, and all of them are incompatible with each other, right? So what wins out? And you get some people that favor this approach versus that approach. They result in wildly different numbers, right? That's the way it is with compensation. Everybody's got their opinion, and there is no one scientific right opinion, right? The example I've used in the past to illustrate this is, you guys are familiar with Apple Computer, right? Okay. You may be familiar with the two co-founders of Apple Computer, Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak, right? Steve Wozniak was the computer geek that actually invented the technology. Steve Jobs was essentially the salesman and that sold it and got everyone on board with it and got them to believe in it and all this kind of stuff, right? Now, when Apple was founded, the only thing we can say for sure that's a concrete fact is that Steve Jobs, working with Steve Wozniak, created something that's worth a lot. Let's say I know it's worth more, but let's say it's $1 billion a year, okay? So Steve Jobs plus Steve Wozniak equals $1 billion. That's all you can say. Now here's the question. How much is Steve Wozniak worth on his own? No one in the world can tell you that, because it's simply a matter of opinion. All you know is that Steve Wozniak working with Steve Jobs results in $1 billion a year or something of value, right? Now, you could have theories about, well, it was mostly Steve Jobs that made that happen. Or you could say, no, it was mostly Steve Wozniak that made that happen, right? Now, here's an interesting historical point. Steve Jobs went and founded another company in the 80s called Next Computer. It was a colossal flop. So Steve Jobs on his own equals bankruptcy. Steve Jobs equals zero. Steve Jobs plus Steve Wozniak equals $1 billion a year. Does that mean Steve Wozniak is worth $1 billion a year? No one can say. You see, you can argue whatever perspective you want. There's no facts to settle this that are conclusive, right? So think about your value in a company. Let's say you were an employee in a small work group that generated $50 billion of value last year, $50 million of value for your company last year. Now, was that mainly due to you, or was it mainly due to all the other people and you were just kind of along for the ride? You didn't really contribute anything in the grand scheme. How are we to know? Well, there is no way to know, right? All you know is that you, as part of that team, generated $50 million in a year, something like that. That's all you can say, right? So this is where, the uncertainty begins with how to place value on somebody, right? And it gets even more complicated when you go within an individual and say, well, was this because of their education, or was it because of their experience, or was it because of their personality, right? There's no way to get clear answers. You can argue it any way you want, and that's why we have all kinds of theories on this, right? So who generates the value, and therefore who should get the compensation because they're the reason why the value is generated? It's all smoke and mirrors. That's a tremendous oversimplification, but that's basically the problem with compensation theory. So that's what's really going on here. So there's no absolute thing you can say. There's no absolute thing an employer can say about how much you're worth. So if someone says, well, no, you're only worth this much, I wouldn't recommend saying this, but you could say to their face, that's crap. Because show me conclusively, scientifically, with mathematics, with figures, that that's true. They can't. They can't demonstrate that. It's all based on a theory. It's based on their opinion. That's fine. You look at Steve Wozniak. We were talking about Steve Wozniak, who founded Apple Computer with Steve Jobs. He's the one that created, essentially, the Apple II, almost single-handedly. The thing that made Apple a company, as I understand it. Before that, he worked for, this is a well-known story. Before that, he worked for, I think it was HP, the printer company. And, he had a contract with them where they owned whatever it was that he invented or something. That's been shown in a couple of movies. I don't know what the reality was, but it was something similar to that, I believe. And, they turned him down. They said, no one would ever want this, right? They gave it away. To them, Steve Wozniak was essentially worth zero. But he leaves, and then he creates something that's worth $1 billion a year. It's actually a lot more than that, right? So you can see how perspectives are off. Therefore, compensation essentially becomes what you can argue for, what you can negotiate for, and not about anything based in reality. It's all about perceptions, I hate to say it, but that's what it is. So don't let anyone tell you, oh, you're only worth this, or you're not worth that, or whatever. That's all crap. There's no way to say. Okay? Now, that also works the other way around. If you feel you're worth X, that might be your opinion. But if you're trying to convince somebody of it, you have no way of demonstrating that unless you've gone out and you've generated all that value yourself, by yourself. You know what I mean? So it's a double-edged sword, but still, it makes this process very nebulous. And, it's just a dog and pony show. It's what people can push for. And that brings me to my final point today on the salary side before we move on. And that is that I'm talking about how value is based on perceptions of value. Well, the perception of value often is based on areas of greatest uncertainty or perceived uncertainty. If you ever wondered why they pay salespeople so much and they pay people in operations so little in comparison, generally speaking, it's because of that. Who's the highest paid people in society? It's like doctors and lawyers, right? Well, coincidentally, those happen to be the areas where the perception is that you need the absolute best doctor you can to save your life, or you need the absolute best lawyer you could possibly get, to help you win in court, right? The perception is that, the individual really matters. They're not a dime a dozen. They're not all the same. There's a huge difference between which individual you get, right? So sales is like that, right? The perception is that, this salesman would be really good, that salesman would be no good. A lot of that is actually crap too. If you think about it, in operations, are all operations people the same? Of course not. You still get that huge variation in effectiveness, but the perception isn't of that, right? So that's why, the perception of uncertainty really drives a lot of perceived value, right? So that's why you go to a job interview, you say like, but here's what I can do. You might think this job is just a clock punching job. Here's what I can do. I can add this value. I can go and in addition to doing the work, I can talk to the customer. I can upsell them. They'll listen to me because I'm a technical authority. They would rather talk to me than a salesperson who doesn't know anything about the technical side. I can open up a lot of repeat business for you. I can do this. I can create efficiencies, blah, blah, this kind of thing. And it's like, the perception now is that, you can add a lot of value. And then therefore, in our eyes, your value goes up, right? So that's a real thing. When there's leeway to negotiate, all this stuff does matter. So there you go. So I wanted to cover these points. These are points I don't usually talk about when we talk about salary negotiation, but they're all kind of part and parcel of this. So hopefully that makes sense.